So today the gospel speaks about the cost of discipleship. And it's very fitting. This part here has always kind of haunted me as we're doing this building project here. How terrible it would be if we didn't really plan ahead. We didn't take the 6 years to really receive the resources that we need. And what you see is what you get. Imagine if that's what the fellowship hall looked like now, is just without a roof, half a wall. And again, people would laugh and say, well, there's someone who started but didn't take the time to really think about how to get to the end. And if we need to do that in our earthly life, how much more do we need to do that in focusing on heaven? Do we really take that time to pray and to really contemplate what the church says is the last things, the 4 last things? To contemplate the reality that one day we will die. It's important for us to think about that, because that allows us to live in a different way. I think one of the struggles maybe sometimes when we are younger is that we don't really think about that. And so our decisions sometimes don't really think about, how is this going to impact my eternal salvation? And as we get older, maybe we start thinking about that more. But how beautiful it would be is if we started when we were younger, and maybe started right now, and said, am I really thinking about that one day I will breathe my last, and in that moment I will come before the Lord, and he will ask me this question: did you love? And love is always in truthfulness. It's not just a butterfly in the stomach, but did you will heaven for others? Did you will the dignity of others? Did you love God? Did you allow him to be truly the first one in your life? Or was he just another piece of the puzzle, and you were the crust? Was he the crust of your life? And everything that you did is about giving him glory and honor. And that's the second of those last things, is that judgment. And so one day we will die. One day we will come before the judgment seat, and the Lord will ask us that question. And remember the story of the sheep and the goats. Like, Lord, when did you show up? And, you were hungry and we didn't give you something to eat. If I saw you there, of course I'd do that. And the Lord said, because you didn't do it to the littlest ones, you didn't do it to me. And so we need to be careful not to miss the Lord's visitation as he walks in that mysterious, distressing disguise of the poor. And not just the physically poor, but poor in so many other different ways. Are we there for our brothers and sisters in their emotional poverty, in their spiritual poverty, in loneliness? And then the third of those last things, and the fourth, is about two different alternatives. Purgatory is part of heaven, because once you're in purgatory, you are automatically going to heaven. There is no turning back. You're already a holy soul. But we have these two alternatives, and it's important for us to remember that our soul will go on forever. We have an immortal soul. It's never going to end. But how are we going to spend that eternity? Depends on how we make that choice in this life. And are we thinking on that final destination? And is that ordering everything that we're doing? Think about how athletes, how they think about the gold medal. That's their goal, getting across the finish line. And so everything that they do in life, their food choices, their exercise, their who they hang out with, all these different things are ordered to, is this going to help me cross that finish line and get the gold. And St. Paul will talk about that same thing of running, not just for a crown of laurels that's going to fade away, but an eternal weight of glory. And St. Paul asks us, are we running the race? Not looking behind, but looking to what lies ahead. And so the Lord says here, in the same way, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. And this is what we call, in Ignatian terms, in St. Ignatius of Loyola's understanding, the freedom of holy indifference. Some of us are called to give away physically everything. That's a particular vocation. But for the majority of us, that is not necessarily our call. But our call is something called holy indifference, which means to not cling to anything, so that you can only cling to God. And everything that you have in your life that is a created good, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a material possession, whether it's a talent, whether it's a strength, whatever it is, all those things are created by God as good. And to the extent that it leads you to cling to God, you hold on to that. To the extent that it leads you away from God, you let go of it. And we need to have our hands open like this so that we can receive whatever the Lord places there, but we don't cling to it, because the moment we cling to it, then it becomes our center point. It becomes the axis on which we make our decisions. And so it's good for us to really kind of contemplate that sense. What's our axis center point? What do we make our decisions on? Are we ruled by fear? Maybe we do our actions because of how others will regard us, and so we, in a sense, make those things and compromise our own values. It's something we need to pray, especially for our politicians that struggle with this in so many different ways. The sense of not having God and that source of truth being the very, very center. And it's very easy to rationalize everything else around. Maybe it's the pursuit of pleasure. I'm going to do these actions in order to get the most out of life. And yet by doing that, maybe we impoverish our soul, because we're thinking about this life and not the life to come. And so we're not, in a sense, storing up treasure in heaven, but we're, in a sense, amassing an army of toys that once we die, they're not going to come with us. So what's your center point? And St. Paul says very beautifully, love is the fulfillment of the law. Every commandment is about loving God and our neighbor. And he lists these different commandments here, which are all about relationships. Do not commit adultery, do not kill, do not steal, do not covet. Whatever other commandment there may be, it's all summed up in love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the fulfillment of the law. And St. Paul will say, owe nothing to anyone except to love one another. And that's something that is beautiful in the life of St. Martin de Porres, because he didn't cling to even his own self-justification. That sense of, I've been wronged, and so you owe me, and I'm going to cling and hold on to something, unforgiveness or a righteousness, because of how you hurt me. And that's something sometimes we can cling to, and it gets in the way of loving, which is the fulfillment of the law. And St. Martin de Porres is someone who experienced this rejection, especially in the very color of his skin. He was born to a Spanish nobleman and to a Panamanian ex-slave. And so he had both black and white in his skin. And because of that, at that particular time, his father actually rejected him. and didn't really even want him to be considered his son because of how that looked as a nobleman having someone with different color skin. And ultimately, much of society rejected him because he didn't really fit anywhere. And he was received into the Dominicans. And even there were sometimes different members that didn't always treat him well. But he won people over through his kindness. They called him Martin the Charitable, because he would even overlook their faults, because in humility he recognized that he was a sinner in need of God's mercy. And so he would always give someone the benefit of the doubt in humility. And in doing that, he would love that person who was treating him wrong, and he would win them over by kindness. Because they couldn't understand, after all that they've done to reject him, he just kept coming back to them saying, I love you. And little by little, that opened their heart to recognize the love of God. He won people over through kindness. He didn't cling to something that could have been very justifiable. You're treating me this way, I'm going to treat you that way as well. But he said, I'm not going to cling to this because it's a poison that just will pull me down. And instead I cling to God, and I have him at the very goal of my life. So all that I do is going to be about loving God and loving my neighbor. And he did it in simple, kind ways. And so he becomes this beautiful messenger of mercy for us to be able to overcome evil with good. So have God as that center point of your existence. Have the reality of one day you will come before the judgment seat of God as that goal to say, how am I living my life now? And is it truly fulfilling the law by loving God and neighbor, not just in word, but also in our actions? And ask St. Martin for that help to love charitably, even those that hurt us.